Collapse and comeback. On June 12, 2023, more than 8,000 of the internet's busiest communities switched off on the same day. Forums with billions of combined members went dark on purpose. Their target wasn't a government or a hacker or a rival company. It was the very website they lived on, Reddit itself. Here's the strange part. The company they were revolting against had never, in nearly 20 years, made a single full year of profit. Reddit was one of the 10 most visited sites on Earth, a household name, a place hundreds of millions of people opened every day, and it was quietly bleeding money the entire time. For most of its life, it wasn't even clear it would survive as a business. This is the story of how it turned that around, using the very users who tried to burn it down. Reddit launched in 2005, built by two college friends, Steve Huffman and Alexis Ohanian. The idea was simple. It was a giant public notice board, split into thousands of separate rooms called subreddits. One for cooking, one for cats, one for particle physics, one for almost anything you can name. Anyone could post a link or a question, and everyone else voted it up or down. The best stuff rose to the top. They called it the front page of the internet, and the name stuck. But Reddit ran on an unusual bargain. Almost all of the real work, sorting posts, banning trolls, keeping those thousands of communities alive, was done by unpaid volunteer moderators. Reddit supplied the servers, its users supplied the labor and the content for free. That volunteer army built something enormous. The company just never built a dependable way to make money from it. For years, the numbers told the same story. Reddit was growing quickly and losing money anyway. In 2022, it brought in about $667 million in revenue. In 2023, that climbed to $804 million, roughly a fifth higher in a single year. That is genuinely fast growth for any business. And yet, across its whole life as a company, Reddit had stacked up more than $700 million in accumulated losses, the running total of every year it spent more than it earned. In 2023 alone, even with revenue at record highs, it still posted a net loss of around $91 million. Advertising on a site famous for anonymous usernames, niche in jokes and heated arguments was never quite enough to cover the bill. Reddit had a giant audience and a small bank balance. Something had to give, and in 2023 something did. In April 2023, Reddit announced it would start charging outside developers to connect to the site through its API, the technical doorway that lets other apps pull in Reddit's posts. For most people, that sounds like harmless plumbing, but a whole ecosystem of independent apps, the tools many long-time users actually browsed Reddit with every day, depended on that access being cheap or free. The developer of one much-loved app called Apollo said the new fees would cost him something like $20 million a year. He announced Apollo would shut down. The reaction was fury. On June 12th, more than 8,000 communities went private in protest, the blackout we opened with. Some of the biggest names on the site went dark for days on end. It was one of the largest coordinated user rebellions the modern internet had ever seen. And Reddit, staring at all of it, barely flinched, because management had spotted something the protesters hadn't. That something was artificial intelligence. Right around this time, chatbots like ChatGPT were exploding into the mainstream, and they carried a hungry secret. They were trained on enormous piles of human writing scraped from across the open web. And some of the richest writing anywhere, real people explaining, arguing, joking, and answering each other's questions, for nearly 20 years, was sitting on Reddit, free for the taking. Every answer a chatbot gave might quietly be built on something a stranger once typed on Reddit at 2 in the morning. Reddit's leadership realized its true product had never really been advertising. It was the conversation itself. All of those years of messy, human chatter were, almost overnight, one of the most valuable training datasets on the planet. charging developers wasn't only about third-party apps. It was about forcing the booming AI industry to start paying for the fuel it had been quietly taking for nothing. So Reddit made two big moves at once. First, it went public. On March 21, 2024, Reddit listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker RDDT, with its shares priced at $34 each. On the first day of trading, the stock jumped by roughly 48%, and the sale raised about $519 million in fresh cash for the company. A business that had never once turned an annual profit was suddenly worth billions of dollars on paper. Wall Street, it turned out, wasn't buying the old advertising story at all. It was buying the new one, the data. And that data was already selling. Just before the IPO, in February 2024, Reddit signed a deal reported to be worth around $60 million a year, letting Google use its content to help train AI. A few months later, it struck a second arrangement, this time with OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, reportedly worth in the region of $70 million a year. Think about what that means. 20 years of ordinary internet arguments had quietly turned into a revenue stream. The unpaid conversations of millions of everyday users were now being licensed, in bulk, to the biggest names in technology. The front page of the internet had finally found the business model it had spent 2 decades searching for. The turnaround showed up in the accounts remarkably fast. In the third quarter of 2024, Reddit reported its first-ever profit as a public company, net income of roughly $30 million, on revenue of about $348 million, which was up 68% from a year before. Daily visitors climbed past 97 million and, for the first time ever, briefly topped 100 million. After 19 years stuck in the red, the company had finally, genuinely made money. And the crowd that had openly rebelled against it just a year earlier was now bigger than ever, and indirectly helping to pay the bills. By 2025, the shift was impossible to ignore. Reddit reported around $2 billion in revenue for the full year, and its first profitable year in its entire history, with daily users still climbing well past 110 million. The comeback was, by any measure, real, but every comeback carries a fresh risk. The same artificial intelligence that rescued Reddit is now learning to answer people's questions directly, which means users may never click through to the original discussion at all. Google's own AI summaries have already been quietly draining visitors away from websites across the internet. By 2026, Reddit was reportedly weighing whether to walk away from that $60 million Google deal entirely, worried that it was feeding the very machine that might one day replace it. Reddit spent almost 20 years unable to sell its audience. In the end, it didn't really sell the audience at all. It sold what the audience had already said, 2 decades of conversations nobody thought to charge for. Sometimes the most valuable thing a company owns isn't the crowd. It's everything the crowd left behind. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. New collapses and comebacks land 3 times a week.